Well, thank you. So, of all the bugle signals sounded in the world, the two that stand out as music of remembrance are the American Bugle Call of Taps and the Commonwealth counterpart, the Last Post. And with the exception of a few, most bugle calls are only a few bars long and not usually recognized by the general population. To be sure, there are calls like Reveille, First Call, that's heard at racetracks, Charge, heard at baseball games, and the most recognizable calls for Retreat and To the Color, which are sounded to mark the end of a duty day in the military. But taps and the Last Post are among the most recognized melodies in the world. Both calls share a similar function in that they're both sounded at the end of the day for funerals and memorial services. Okay. Did that work? No. It's the right one. As opposed to the wrong one.
The wrong one. Should be working.
Look at that. Oh, I broke it.
You broke it.
Hang my head in shame. Maybe I just need to, I broke the system. Okay, I'm sorry. Thanks. Yeah, technology. So there are two good books on the history of the call that can be found in 24 Notes That Tap Deep Emotions, the story of America's most famous bugle call that I did. And also, if you haven't found it, it's a terrific book by Alan Turner called The Last Post. And it's available on Amazon. Now, each military tradition possesses, its own vocabulary of sound, signals that once, governed the movement of troops on a battlefield now echo through ceremonies of remembrance and for funerals, of course. Now, among these calls, like I said before, two that have risen up throughout the entire world are taps, and then, of course, the military Commonwealth counterpart, the Last Post. And both melodies are spare, they're unadorned, shaped by the natural overtones of the bugle. Both calls were born in a different era on different sides of the Atlantic, but both serve the same essential purpose. Both mark the end of the duty day, or the end of the day, and also they also are used in memorial services and in commemoration. So we'll take a real quick look at the origins and development and the cultural inferences to each of these two calls. And how they go beyond, just those 4 or 5 notes that started off as bugle calls, but have evolved into symbols of honor and grief and collective remembrance. So before examining the calls itself, it's important to understand that the world that produced them. These calls were born on battlefields. For centuries, armies depended on musical signals to coordinate large groups of soldiers, and of course, most of these soldiers had very limited literacy. But they could understand what to do when they heard a bugle call. Fifes and drums and later bugles served essentially as communication tools. Each instrument played an important part in our military. Drums regulated marching paces and camp routine. Drums also were used to signal instruments. The different type of beats would tell soldiers what to do. Fifes, of course, added that melodic use, and trumpets and bugles delivered very sharp, penetrating tones. Now, by the late 18th and early 19th century, European armies professionalized and standardized bugle signals, and they became put into manuals. And these manuals, updated through successive wars, help preserve that musical DNA from which taps and the last post would eventually emerge and evolve. This is from an 1818 British manual. And what's interesting to note is that they weren't very particular in the printing of their music. You know, bugle calls are like G and C and E. They didn't really care. So it's close enough. And most of these calls were taught by rote anyway. So the last post has its roots in an older ritual known as the tattoo. Now, the tattoo was a nightly military practice that dated back to the 17th century. And basically, during the evening, a duty officer would make his rounds through the garrison or through the encampment, ensuring that the sentries were in place, and those on off duty were returning back to the camps, usually from the local taverns. During the time of this era, drummers would actually walk through the town beating the tattoo. That was the signal for the bartenders to turn off the taps. So the word tattoo actually derives from the Dutch phrase doden tap toe, which means basically cut off the tap. And so they adopted that expression as part of the nightly routine. Now, the ritual included going to the various sentries, the first post, the second post, the third post, and finally the last post, where we get the name. And it wasn't really at that time a more solemn or ceremonial piece. It was just a functional piece, times for soldiers to be in their quarters. This is a copy, the front of one of the bugle manuals of the time, which is very interesting because in the middle, you'll see the two type of instruments that were used. The big horn is the Hanover horn, also usually in B flat or C. The others in the middle are natural trumpets, usually in E flat or C. Now, the first significant printed evidence of the last post appears in Hyde's 1799, A New and Complete Preceptor for the Trumpet and Bugle. And it was published under the title of Last Post, or Second Post. Hyde was a virtuoso keyed bugler and also a member of the King's Theatre Orchestra. And he may have arranged this for the second bugle, but no one's been able to confirm that. So, good example of what it looked like. Now, his version, by the way, was written for two buglers, even though the modern only uses a solo version. So by the late 19th century, last post starts appearing at funerals and memorial services in Britain. So the shift has started to move now from the idea of a functional end of the day call to doing something that commemorates a funeral. Also, one writer described it as, I'm going to crucify my Latin here, but it's Nunc Dimittis, which is a biblical prayer that is like a dismissal. And so the idea now becomes that the call is performed to end, at the end of someone's life, but yet it also signals the beginning of the new life everlasting. So the idea was, well, we should now have a bugle call that represents that. So the tradition in Europe, in the Commonwealth, was to play the last post, have a moment of silence, and then play the call of reveille, or they call it reveille, or the rouse. So if you've watched any of the major funerals in Britain, like for Queen Elizabeth, they had the buglers play the last post, and then they played the Rouse or the Reveille afterwards. So if the 19th century shaped the last post's identity as a ceremonial piece, World War I enshrines it in the national conscience of Britain and other Commonwealth countries. The scale of loss in World War I was unprecedented. Millions of soldiers, many of them mere civilians only months before, were thrust into the horrors of World War I. And with deaths so frequent and mass burials common, the role of music became more and more emotionally charged. The last post sounded over countless funerals on the Western Front, usually perhaps over makeshift graves. But the call itself, the dignity, really seemed to transcend its military origins. Also, in the civilian culture, it takes on a new meaning too. It was played at the funeral by a dozen Boy Scout buglers for the funeral of Wallace Hartley, who was the band director on the Titanic. They did find his body and his violin, by the way. And when he was brought back to England, it was one of the biggest funerals ever held. Let's see, and that's his gravesite. And for any Titanic scholars out there, it has the inscription of music with the words, "Nearer my God to thee," but it's not the "Nearer my God to thee" melody that we're all familiar with. It's the one that's found in the Anglican hymn book. A picture of last post sounded, I believe these are Australians. So after the war, permanent memorials were erected across the Commonwealth. And at just about every one of those ceremonies, last post becomes a standard feature of the commemorative ceremony. If you've ever been to the Centre Path in London, they hold the ceremonies there on November 11th each year. Not Armistice Day, it's called Remembrance Day over there, okay? Interestingly enough, at the Menin Gate in Belgium, buglers sound the last post, which is not a Belgian bugle call at all. It's a Commonwealth. It's a British bugle call. But the citizens were so taken by the fact that 50,000 Commonwealth soldiers fought and protected this area that they built this special gate into the town. And since 1928, with brief interruptions during World War II, local buglers have sounded the last post every evening at 8 o'clock. What's interesting is that since 1928, and the centennial is coming up soon, less than 25 buglers have played that. It's like handed down through generations. They do not allow anyone else to play that call. They have other musicians who are involved, bagpipers, other buglers. I'm happy to say that I was the first civilian they allowed to play taps there after they finished the last post. This is the group today. They're made up of, they're not professional musicians. They are members of the fire brigade who are taught how to play the bugle. So, and that's all they basically know how to do. But they're really, really wonderful folks. And they like to go to the bar before the tavern before they go. Yes, before, because when I went there, we went out to the tavern first. I said, "Are we supposed to play?" Just relax. we do this every day. Yeah. Yes.
Do they only sell it on a British?
Correct. They used the British duty bugles, and they had a whole set made for them. So, of course, across the Atlantic Ocean, the American military developed its own call of remembrance, shaped by influences from Britain, France, And I don't, have to go over too much of this. Of course, the most famous call is a taps, and the story of that begins in July of 1862 during the American Civil War with General Daniel Butterfield, who's not happy with the call for extinguished lights. He brings in his bugler from the 83rd Pennsylvania, a young man by the name of Oliver Wilcox Norton, and together they reshape. They don't compose, but they reshape an old bugle call that has gone out of service by the Civil War. According to Norton's writings, of course, he says that the music was handed to him on the back of an envelope and they reworked it. And of course, that call first sounded in camp the summer of 1862 on Harrison's Landing by the James River, soon catches on to other units. Very short, emotional call, but everyone starts playing it. And it becomes, of course, associated with funerals by the end of the Civil War. And, of course, there is the romantic myth of how the call came about, that a captain finds a wounded soldier on the battlefield, and when he turns him over, it's his son. Oh, my God. And in the pocket, he finds the music, the taps, which he has played. Great story and everything, but it's a myth. And I still have the offer of a $2,000 gold-plated trumpet or bugle to anyone who can provide what unit Captain Ellicombe was with and where he's buried. No one's taken me up on it yet, but that's okay. Now, interestingly enough, even though the call becomes used unofficially, it does not become adopted into the Army manuals until 1891, almost 30 years after it's written. It appears in manuals under extinguished lights because that's what it's used for, but not till 1891 does it actually say in the manual taps and how it's supposed to be used at funerals. Okay, the Army moves slowly, correct, Colonel? But it does move. It's, of course, a very simple melody. This is a photograph of Frank Witchey, who was the bugler who sounded taps in 1921 for the burial of the unknown soldier at Arlington. This is a ceremony at Arlington. I think this is a photo from the service for President Taft. As you all know, there are lyrics associated with bugle calls. And of course, the day is done, gone the sun is probably the most common one used with taps. There is one for last post. Interestingly enough, come home, come home. I like it at the end. Be brave, be just, be honest, be true men, be true men. That's very British. Of course, then at the end of the war, the call was sounded. There's a story that says that this particular bugler, who says he was with Pershing, he claims that Pershing had ordered him to sound taps as the hostilities ended, but cannot even find any kind of research on this guy that he was even in the unit under Pershing. So his bugle, by the way, is at the Smithsonian, which prompted a lot of research. However, there's a much more verified account of a bugler, Corporal Pierre Sellinger, who was a French musician who did sound Cease Fire at 11 o'clock on November 11, 1918. His bugle, interestingly enough, is here in the United States. It's in Indiana. So now it's unclear whether the last post was sounded at that moment by British units, but certainly would have been played extensively during all the commemorations that were to follow. Now, musical characteristics of these two tunes. Both calls share the same harmonic constraints of a bugle, except for the last post utilizes the low C, something that taps doesn't. And it's typically played in the key of B flat on a British bugle. Taps, of course, is more of a restrained. It's typically played in B flat, but it's also been played in G. It has this natural rise to it, and then it descends down to end. When the French in 1935 were at Yorktown, the general was at Yorktown, heard taps being sounded, he said, "Why don't we have a call? I don't understand. The British have a call, Americans have a call, but we don't have a funeral call." So he directed his music director to compose what is now known as Amour, which, interestingly enough, does the same thing, goes up and down, and is also has 24 notes. So both of these calls are not only played on the bugle, but also modern trumpets. Today, the use of taps and last post really extends beyond the military. Every day at the World War I Memorial since May of 2021, 5 p.m., we have a bugler in World War I uniform who sounds the call. Also, let's see now. There are other places that utilize in Australia, in Canberra, Australia, every day they have a bugler who sounds the last post. Of course, at the Meningate, they use last post. Okay, bugle calls naturally, are become adopted. Composers start writing accompaniments to them. There is this one here, was set by what's his name? Oh, Isidore Lavender. His dates are 1867 to 1953. Originally created a piano version. I cannot find that piano version, checking real hard, but it's been put into string quartet versions and other ensembles using his harmonies. But it's a very simplistic harmony, okay? In reality, it's really tough to harmonize bugle calls. You have to be as creative as possible. There is one, however, written by Charles Stanford for full orchestra. This is called The Last Post. The opening of it starts with last post that's orchestrated. It's accompanied by full orchestra. And then there's a whole long section for chorus based on a poem. And then at the very end, a lone bugler sounds the entire call. I've not been able to find a score of this, but I surely would love to find it. I can't find a recording either. There's a really nice piano version of this written by Miles Nottage, and it was recorded by one of the piano players in one of the British military bands. Really, really terrific the way. And even though there's really no accidentals in it, he uses some very nice chords as a setting to it. So there have been many versions of this. A lot of, there's another one. Oh, Jay Dawson did a version using Abide With Me. So it would go back and forth. Then there's a piece called Nightfall in Camp, which also uses the hymn Lead Kindly Light, where it interspersed just goes back and forth. Very nice setting for band and bugler, and that's available. You can find that. Taps, of course, has also been said. This is probably the most played and most known one. This is by Thomas Knox, who was the arranger for the United States Marine Band. For a long time, nobody knew. They had recordings of it, but there was nobody could find the arrangement. So I called up the library and said, hey, send it over. So I put it into notation. And from that, I also expanded it for full concert band. So you can have either brass or a full band play it. There is also Taps Eternal Father, that was arranged by Captain Kenneth Force of the Merchant Marine Band. And that's a very nice setting too. It's available. If you buy it, be aware there's a lot of wrong notes, unfortunately. Accidentals and stuff that you'll have to spend some time sorting out. And I've been thinking about going through and doing an edition of it. Bill Holcomb actually did a version of it called "The Call Has Come" for brass and a chorus, and then bugle solos. Taps for the Fallen Brave. This was originally on a 101 strings album. Yeah, believe it or not. For us old enough who remember the 101 strings, I transcribed it from the recording, and then when I went to try to get a license for it, nobody has any idea who did the arrangement. There's no record whatsoever. So it's loosely based on taps. So I also forgot another piece. There's a piece called "Sunset at Quantico." So I've got one last piece, and then we'll move on in about 2 minutes. So I did actually 2 arrangements just recently. I did one for trumpet quartet of The Last Post, utilizing a lot of harmonic language in it. But I also did this piece called, I call it Meditation on Last Post and tap. So you'll hear it with a string orchestra, and I'm going to also transcribe it for band. So hopefully this will work. Lasts about 2-3 minutes tops. It's amazing what you could do with major chords. That's all that is, just major. This is the Thomas Knox, scored for strings. It's amazing how a bugle call can be made into an emotional piece of music. And so, I'm sort of inspired by Tom Knox, great arranger. And the thing on Last Post, like I said, it's just nothing, B flat, A flat, E flat, B major, and back to E flat. And it just creates that interesting sound. And of course, as Bill Holcomb always taught me, if you have like a sustaining note, like a pedal note, you can write any chord on top of it. It works. Anyway, so that's it. So thank you so much. I was glad to be here.